to welcome to Oxford, Dr. Labinot Greiçevci, difficulty pronouncing the surname, who is currently director at the Research Institute of Development and European Affairs, also known as RIDEA, in Pristina, as well as assistant professor of political science at the Faculty of Political Sciences at UBT in Pristina. And he has also served as a researcher at various academic institutions, including the University of Amsterdam, the University of Manchester. He was here as a visiting researcher, and he has served and continues to serve as a consultant to European and international agencies on matters relating to Kosovo and the Western Balkans. And we've had CSOCs as an entity and a number of us individually interaction with Labinot and with RIDEA, having taken part in excellent conferences which RIDEA have organized in Pristina. So there's a bit of a track history with RIDEA and CSOCs as well. And to serve as discussant, we're absolutely delighted to have with us as well. You see on the screen Dr. Melina Budini, who's a researcher, lecturer, and currently head of the Department of Humanities and Communication at the European University of Tirana in Albania, and has also spent time at Oxford as an academic visitor at St. Anthony. So absolutely delighted that Melina, you're able to join us today. And we're here really to celebrate and discuss Labinot's book, which has been published just this year, titled "The EU as a State Builder in International Affairs: The Case of Kosovo," published by Routledge. And obviously, state building has been an extremely important, very prominent aspect of the international community's engagement. Within the international community, obviously, the European Union has been one of the most prominent players. And I think what's a real achievement about this book is that it offers a very comprehensive look at the work of the EU as a state builder in Kosovo. And when I say state builder, I think it's important to unpack that term, and I think this is what Labinot does so well by looking at the EU's contributions in building institutions and in enhancing the capacities of Kosovo, especially at the governmental level, but also, very importantly, the contributions that the EU has made in terms of normal developments in Kosovo. So it's not just from a technical standpoint, but the norms that are underpinning these institutions. And I'd say these are the broadly two aspects that Labinot looks at. He will explain not only in more detail, but probably more accurately the contents of his book, but just to say that it's a very useful contribution to the literature, and we're again very pleased to have you with us today. So over to you.
Thank you. In fact, thank you for organizing this event and for such a good introduction that you made. So basically, today I'm going to briefly talk about the role of the EU as a state builder in international affairs with a specific view on Kosovo's case, but I will also look onto the role of other international actors which were involved in Kosovo from 1999 till 2020 or 21. Basically, when we talk about the role of EU in Kosovo, we also need first to look at the role of the EU in the entire Western Balkans. So if you can change this slide. My book first discusses as background the role of EU in different countries of the Western Balkans, but not only the role of the EU, but also the role of other international actors which are involved in the Western Balkans. As to the EU, it is important to highlight the accession status of Western Balkan countries, in particular to mention the status of Kosovo as a potential candidate country, and also the role of Bosnia and Herzegovina, which remains still as a potential candidate, whereas we have 4 other countries, Serbia and Montenegro, which opened negotiations and are continuing negotiations with the EU, whereas in the case of North Macedonia and Albania, we do have a stalemate there due to the veto from Bulgaria in opening negotiations between both countries and the European Union. So this landscape or picture remains as the time being as well. On the other hand, on setting the scene within the book, I also look at the role of other international actors present in the Western Balkans. When I say the role of other international Balkans, of the other international actors in the Western Balkans, I have in mind here, in particular, 3 other international actors, if I may name or dab those actors like that. First, Russia, second, China, and third, Turkey. So, as it comes to the China and Russia, we can say that both those actors are involved in political and economic terms. For instance, Russia is involved in the Western Balkans, in particular in Serbia and Republika Srpska, in Bosnia and Herzegovina. On the other hand, China is involved with its economic projects. In particular, we can mention here Belt and Road project, which is an infrastructure project which goes further in the countries of the Western Balkans. In the case of Russia, we have also type of humanitarian base in Serbia, but which in particular is a type of military base in Serbia, and the influence of Russia in the case of Republika Srpska in Bosnia and Herzegovina, it is quite special due to the relations between the leader of Republika Srpska, Milorad Dodik, with Russia's President Vladimir Putin. On the other hand, we do have also the NATO and the EU. So, for instance, if in the last 20 or 21 years since the Thessaloniki summit, there was no enlargement with Western Balkan countries on the European Union level, there was enlargement of NATO with some of the Western Balkan countries. So with the leadership of United States, Albania first, and also Croatia at the same time, and then Montenegro and North Macedonia joined NATO. Kosovo is willing to join NATO, but due to the non-recognition by 4 member states of NATO, is not eligible to join NATO. Serbia is unwilling to join NATO, and Bosnia and Herzegovina is partially willing to join NATO, because the Muslim and Croatian Federation is willing to join NATO, whereas Republika Srpska is not willing to join NATO. So basically, this is the current landscape at the level of Western Balkans. And when it comes to the case of Kosovo, I think that a British scholar, Noel Malcolm, was quite right that he said that everything started in Kosovo, the collapse of the former Republic of Yugoslavia, and it will end up in Kosovo. So basically what we see from the recent developments in the last decade, of course, and also during the few last years, the collapse of former Yugoslavia, it has ended in a way, but now for the final act, we will need to have a final deal between Kosovo and Serbia in order to summarize and close this chapter, which was a tragic chapter of the Western Balkans, and eventually move the region towards Euro-Atlantic integrations, which means also more peaceful relations between countries and more prosperous life for the citizens of the entire Western Balkans. If you can move 2-3 slides. Okay. So now to provide you with some background and book methodology, basically. I'm conducting research on this topic since 2006, and I have conducted research on this topic in various institutions. So as Professor Caplan mentioned some of them, I also conducted field work in different parts of Kosovo, but also in different parts of Europe. So I conducted elite interviews in Pristina, Mitrovica, and other parts of Kosovo, but at the same time I conducted elite interviews in Berlin, Germany, Brussels, several times. So I have interviewed various groups of people, including here local and international officials and members of civil society, academia, media, and also international officials who worked for different international organizations in Kosovo. So basically, the data collection spans is from 2006, when I continued in 2009, 10, 19, and 2020 and 21, when I finished my research in this topic, which culminated in the publication of this book. It is important for the follow-up information and structure that I will provide to illustrate or to inform you about the way how I define success and failure in the book. So basically, failure is equal to number 1, limited success, number 2, relative success or mixed results, number 3, and substantial success, number 4, and complete success, number 5. Certainly, those categories were also used or applied during my elite interview. So when I interviewed various groups of people for my research, I also asked them in line with these categories that I had predefined regarding my book. So when I say in the following slide that EU, for instance, was limited successful in this and that, this means that it was not that successful. It was more linked with failure. Or when I say substantial success, it means that it was near to reach complete success on one of the issues that I addressed in the book. Now, something related to the theories. So regarding theories, I do combine in the book 2 types of theories. The first one is liberal peace thesis or liberal peace approach, and the second one is normative power Europe. The first one, liberal peace approach, I use it due to the fact that most of the state building missions in different parts of the world are being analyzed with the liberal peace approach. And of course, we do have also the critique towards this perspective. On the other hand, I use normative power Europe due to the fact that the main aim or goal of the study is to analyze the role of the EU in the process of state building in Kosovo. So in this context, I do combine the feature or elements of both perspectives. For instance, based on the liberal peace approach, I have generated three main features that are being promoted by the scholars of this approach. The first one is immediate economic reconstruction and establishing free market economy in the case where state building mission takes place. The second feature is institution building. And the third feature is related to ethnic accommodation via the principle of multi-ethnicity. So basically, wherever the state building mission takes place, the intention by the international community is to build up institutions which are in line with the multi-ethnicity principle. In other words, with the consociational model which has been promoted by Arendt, Liebhardt, and other scholars who are relevant in this field. On the other hand, with the normative power Europe, we do have 5 core norms. The first one is sustainable peace, freedom, democracy, human rights, and the rule of law. So basically, there is a linkage. There are links between those 5 norms and also those 3 features or elements that I have highlighted within the liberal peace approach. So I merge those features together and I analyze systematically the 3 aspects which are defined concretely in the following minutes, which I will highlight or underline. At the same time, I do use 2 types of mechanisms for diffusion of norms from the international community in general and from the EU in particular. Those types of mechanisms are overt and transference diffusion. Overt diffusion related to my book means political or physical presence of the international actors in the case where state building process takes place. On the other hand, transference diffusion means technical assistance and funding provided by the EU in this case, but also other international actors regarding the case of Kosovo. So basically, those types of diffusion mechanisms are also applicable or used in both theories, in liberal peace approach and also normative power Europe. So basically, I use the same types of mechanisms for the diffusion of norms and other relevant input by various international actors, but in particular by the EU. Next slide, please. I look within the book at 2 complementary stages. The first one is 1999 till 2008, which means till the Kosovo Declaration of Independence. And the second stage from 2008 till the end of 2020, which covers the post-independence period until end of 2020. Within the first period, 1999 till 2008, I look both at tangible and normative impact. Now let me clarify what do I mean by tangible and normative impact. Tangible impact means when there is a government in place, when the economic reconstruction has been completed, when the free market economy has been established, and when the necessary legal and constitutional framework exists within the country. On the other hand, normative impact is related to the change of human behavior emancipation of citizens and also officials within institution and government, where the process of diffusion of those norms takes place during the international state building mission. In my book, in the case of Kosovo, at the first stage, 1999-2008, I cover both tangible and normative impact. On the other hand, from 2008 till 2020, I do cover only normative impact. Now you may raise the question, why? The answer is that normative impact, in fact, tangible impact, has been completed until the Declaration of Independence. Because in 2008, we had a representative government in Kosovo, economic reconstruction was completed, and also we had the necessary mechanism and legislative framework for the operation of the free market economy. And the same could be applied also regarding the legislative and constitutional framework in relation to ethnic accommodation via a principle of multi-ethnicity. At the same time, except looking at the tangible and normative impact, I also do look at the key versus assistant roles of various international actors present in Kosovo. In other words, I do distinguish the role of the EU via overt and transparent diffusion that I explained previously. And I also do distinguish the role of UN, OSCE, and other international actors via overt and transparent diffusion in two separated periods. So first one, 1999 till 2008, and the second one, 2008 until 2020. Next slide, please. So regarding the results, what type of results we do generate within this two complementary periods. As to the first period, 1999 till 2008, we can say that EU and other international actors reached substantial success regarding tangible impact in the process of state building in Kosovo. On the other hand, EU and other international actors reached relative success or mixed results regarding diffusion of normative impact in Kosovo. Always, I'm talking about the first period, 1999 till 2008. For this period, EU was found out to be the key actor via transparent diffusion. So via funding and technical assistance, EU was the key actor in Kosovo from 1999 till 2008. On the other hand, via political role or over diffusion, other international actors play the main role in Kosovo in the process of state building. And when I say other international actors, here I have in mind Quint, which was an entity which was established basically as part of contact group in the crisis of former Yugoslavia, but Quint in Kosovo was constituted from United States, United Kingdom, France, Germany, and Italy. So basically, Quint as an entity had the main or key role via political tools or via over diffusion in the process of state building in Kosovo from 1999 till 2008. That's what I generate in my study, in my book. On the other hand, regarding the second stage, 2008 till 2020, as I said, we look only at normative impact for this period. And at the same time, we distinguish again between key versus assistant actors in the process of state building in Kosovo. At the same time, for this period, I do look at the role of the EU in facilitating the dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia since March 2011. So, since March 2011, there is a complementary feature or element within the analytical framework, which has to do with the role of the EU as a facilitator in the dialogue process between Kosovo and Serbia. And at the same time, this is also being used as a complementary tool by the European Union in the norm diffusion process, not only in Kosovo, but also in Serbia. So through this process, the EU was aiming to transform, the mindset in a way in both countries, so in Kosovo and Serbia. In this respect, I need to illustrate the way how EU has operated regarding the dialogue, because I think it's important for the follow-up results and findings. This has to do with the EU's constructive ambiguity. So the principle of constructive ambiguity. For instance, let me mention here that more than 30 technical agreements were reached within the framework of EU facilitated dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia. When I say technical agreements, those agreements have to do with issues such as telecommunication, energy, then establishing the association of Serb majority municipalities in Kosovo, then issues of accepting and recognizing IDs of both countries and other related agreements. Here in the book, I do mention several such agreements, but let me illustrate with two agreements the constructive ambiguity of the EU. For instance, regarding the agreement on association of Serb majority municipalities in Kosovo, in order to make happy both sides, Kosovo and Serbia, EU used two different terms or denominators for the same agreement. So it has used association/community. So it has used association in order to make happy Kosovo government, which would say that this is simply an association, a type of non-governmental organization. On the other hand, it has used community in order to make happy Serbian government, which would say that this is not a non-governmental organization, but this is a type of political entity which would create the third level of power in Kosovo, because we have local and national level of governance in Kosovo. So this could be like a regional level of power. So this is constructive ambiguity of the EU in practice. Another agreement in which EU has used, again, same principle, is the integrated border management between Kosovo and Serbia. Again, here we have two terms, border and boundary. You know the difference, so I don't need to explain that. In other words, again, to make happy both governments of Kosovo and Serbia, again, constructive ambiguity in practice. And also other agreements that I do mention in the book were associated with this type of constructive ambiguity. But this was effective in reaching agreements. But when it comes to implementing agreements in practice, it has created plenty of problems and challenges, because this would create that opportunity for both sides to interpret those agreements in different ways or different manners. And what do we lack still is a final deal, comprehensive, legally binding agreement between Kosovo and Serbia, which would solve each and every issue between both countries and would let both countries to move towards European and Euro-Atlantic integration. In the case of Serbia, if Serbia is willing to move towards Euro-Atlantic integration. As to this period, 2008 and 2020, as I mentioned, I do analyze only normative impact. And in this respect, I do find same results as in the independence period. So even that EU was basically the main or the key actor in the terrain in the second period, via overt and transference diffusion, the results regarding normative impact remain almost the same as in the pre-independence period, with some progress in some fields, but if we do analyze and generate results based on the analytical framework, the results would still remain the same, and this is mainly linked with the fact that EU could not find a common denominator, or to speak with a single voice regarding recognition of Kosovo's independence, which has undermined its conditionality mechanism in the terrain, because 5 member states of the European Union still do not recognize Kosovo's independence. So regarding 2008-2020, the EU was the main or primary actor via overt and transference diffusion. Now some concluding remarks of the book, and of course prospects for the EU as a state builder in international affairs, and also the prospects for the region of the Western Balkans in its entirety, and for Kosovo in particular. So when it comes to the EU as a state builder in international affairs, one may highlight or summarize several elements which would make EU as an ideal state builder. For instance, by several scholars, EU is considered as a country in paradise. So it's a type of perpetual peace story, because in the last 70 years, we do not have a war or conflict within the European territory. Now, of course, the case between Russia and Ukraine is another story, but still it's beyond the borders of the European Union. Then the EU, it has a normative ready-made framework, which is quite useful to be applied in the processes of state building everywhere in the world. And of course, features such as sustainable peace, human rights, then rule of law, free market economy are essential for promoting the transformation of various post-conflict societies and countries. So EU has all such features and elements. Then we do have transformation or transformative power of the European Union in the Central and Eastern European countries. So basically, 10 countries from the Central and Eastern Europe joined EU in 2004, and this was followed with 2 additional countries, Bulgaria and Romania, in 2007. And in a way, it has transformed those countries. The European membership, it has transformed those countries. Similarly, another feature or element of the EU as a state builder in international affairs is its economic potential, economic power. Then EU per se is a project which is based on peace, reconciliation, and integration based on norms and values. So basically, one would expect huge results. Also, in the case of Kosovo, regarding the transformative power of the EU and its role in the state building process. However, what do I find related or regarding the case of Kosovo? There are at least 2 types of challenges which EU needs to address in order to generate complete successful results, not only in Kosovo, but in the entire region of the Western Balkans. The first type of challenges is related to horizontal conflicts between member states of the European Union. Basically, as in the beginning of the collapse of Socialist Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, when EU failed in a way to find a peaceful solution for the dissolution process of former Yugoslavia. Similarly, in the subsequent stages, the EU has failed to find a common voice between its member states regarding the issues in entire former Yugoslavia, but in Kosovo in particular. So even in launching and deploying its mission of rule of law, EU has encountered problem to find a common solution. And the main problem was also linked with the non-recognition by 5 EU member states of Kosovo's independence. So basically, the EU was able to find the lowest common denominator, how it is quite famously used in the foreign policy structures and mechanisms of the European Union. So the lowest common denominator in the case of Kosovo was we agreed to disagree. And we had 22 recognitions. Basically, when UK, Great Britain was part of EU, we had 23, but 5 non-recognitions which still continue to persist. And without having a common position in the case of Kosovo regarding its statehood, the EU has failed to diffuse successfully the norms, in order to reach complete success. As I said, it has reached some mixed results. Relative success in diffusing norms in the case of Kosovo, but the main obstacle in this sense was the lack of common policy in the case of Kosovo. This is the first type of challenges that I have identified in my book. So, horizontal conflicts between member states of the European Union. The second type of challenge is quite interesting one, but it had its impact because we are talking here about norm and value diffusion. And it has to do with staffing problems. So the missions of the European Union, various missions, even those in the pre-independence period or even those in the post-independence period, encountered challenges regarding staffing problems. And those staffing problems were associated with two types of challenges. The first one, corruption challenges within the EU staff, and the second one with the lack of results in the work of the EU officials in the terrain. I do mention in the book several such cases, but in order to illustrate here the context, I will mention two examples. One in the pre-independence period, and the second one in the post-independence period. In the pre-independence period, we had EU pillar, which was a structure within UNMIC administration, but which was led by the EU officials always. And EU pillar within UNMIC was responsible to manage Kosovo Energy Corporation. And the manager of Kosovo Energy Corporation in the pre-independence period was always an international official. And one of those international officials was Joe Trashler, a German guy, who was, but from EU member state, maybe there's no importance to highlight his nationality, but he was caught back in his country for corruption for 3 or 3 million euros during his work of managing the Kosovo Energy Corporation, and those money were caught and returned back. But when we are speaking about non-diffusion, this is an example, a model, it is not a model which was providing the complete picture of the EU or international community, but still it is there. It has left its track. So this is one problem. This is one example in the pre-independence period. On the other hand, in the post-independence period, we can mention several examples which were problematic with the EU-led mission, so with the EU mission of rule of law. Let me illustrate here with two examples. The first one was back in 2010, 2011, when some Romanian police officials, which were part of the EU-led mission, were caught in the border between Kosovo and North Macedonia, like smuggling cigarettes and alcohol. So again, this is not what the EU has provided in its entirety, but this is an example. Those were EU officials, and they have acted, of course, and they have discharged by the head of the UNEX, but still there is an example of non-diffusion in a way. And also another example is with EU-lex judges and prosecutors. Several scholars and authors in the field highlight that, for instance, prosecutors and judges from Central and Eastern European countries were showing up to work in Kosovo because they were being paid more in Kosovo rather than back in their home countries. So rather than coming and showing up in diffusing norms, one might raise the question if this was linked with their level of salary. So those are examples which undermine, linked to the second challenge, staffing problems of the EU institutions and agencies in the terrain. So now, because I need to wrap up to finish in 5 minutes my presentation, some final concluding remarks and prospects additional to what I just said previously. So in order for EU to be successful in transforming Kosovo and transforming the entire region of the Western Balkans, first EU needs to solve its horizontal conflicts. So the EU25 versus EU5. In other words, if the EU will not be able to solve those conflicts, horizontal conflicts between member states, then I think that we would need a more proactive role of other international actors in order to solve the problems and challenges that do exist in Kosovo, but also between Kosovo and Serbia and in the entire region of the Western Balkans. And of course, when I say in Kosovo and in relations between Kosovo and Serbia and the entire region of the Western Balkans, when I refer to other international actors, here I have in mind also United States, but also United Kingdom, which British government, in other words, which has appointed, a special envoy for the Western Balkans, like some other countries did act similarly in the last few months. So if the EU is not capable to solve as an entity the challenges that do exist in the region of the Western Balkans, then that gap, that vacuum needs to be filled in by other international actors. And it would be much better if that gap would be filled in by Western actors rather than actors such as Russia, China, and any other alternative actor. So basically, the case of Kosovo will illustrate for the EU if the EU has learned its lessons from the past, from the 1990s, or it hasn't learned yet. This will be seen, of course, in the upcoming months and few years eventually. The final chapter of state building in Kosovo and the role of EU, US, and other international actors remain an open book in a way. And this includes the rest of the Western Balkans. Perhaps the idea of member state building, which was applicable in the case of Central and Eastern European countries, could also be relevant in the case of Kosovo, Serbia, and other Western Balkan countries. The EU accession process, I think, it needs to be, in the Western Balkans, it needs to be a process which would include all 6 Western Balkan countries together. If one or two of them join in advance and the rest would remain without joining the EU, then this process would suffer for years or decades. And of course, the EU's success or failure in Kosovo and wider in the Western Balkans is one of the crucial tests of the European Union in international affairs. Of course, in the regional context, the EU's litmus test in Kosovo relates to its role in achieving sustainable peace and prosperity, not only in Kosovo, but in the entire Western Balkans. And with this note, I end up here for the time being, and I'm more than happy to receive your comments and questions. Thanks a lot for your patience and attending my presentation.
Thank you. Now, as in your book, you've given us a very broad, sweeping presentation. We're going to invite now Alina to offer her observations. So over to you. I hope you've been able to hear us well enough in this presentation.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you for the opportunity actually, to be part of this panel discussion on a very interesting book with CISOX community. Always thrilled to be part of the team and hope to join there soon at the European Studies Center on the occasion of the 20th anniversary of the Southeast Europe Studies at Oxford. In my role as the representative of the European University of Tirana, I would like to congratulate you all, Offen, Julie, and everyone, for your inclusive approach and outstanding achievements in terms of activities and collaborations for the study of the region. So without further ado, I would like to start my discussion by on the book, on the very important book by Labinot Greiçevci, by pointing out that the topic regarding the international state building in general and the case of Kosovo specifically has generated quite an amount of scholarly articles and studies from different fields related to foreign policy, but also in other contexts, such as human rights, global security, legal studies, political economy, post-conflict and peace studies, even media studies, and so on and so forth. Few of them are focused on the European Union role as an international global player related to the case of Kosovo. The book by Labinot, the European Union as a state builder in international affairs, the case of Kosovo, published in the Routledge series, is one of them. The author endeavors to assess the results of the state building mission of the EU in the case of Kosovo, and by doing so, sets out to evaluate the importance of Kosovo's intervention as a crucial point in international affairs and state building missions. There is now in place quite a new global disorder, let's call it this way, with the Russia-Ukraine war developing as we speak, that might constitute another turning point in international affairs. However, in the case of Kosovo, we already have a practice that is carried out by the EU, other actors as well, the United Nations, United States and its allies, with a certain success, one would argue. Indeed, in the past 25 years, the European Union has increasingly become involved in international state building operations, especially in the Western Balkans, like in Kosovo, but also in Bosnia and Herzegovina, North Macedonia, or elsewhere in the world, for the matter of fact. The reactions towards such interventions have been mixed, with many contesting those international missions for lack of efficiency or fragmentation and lack of coherence, calling the liberal state building framework overall a policy blip that was always destined to fail and based on more of a naive idealism rather than realistic prospects. I'm referring here to Florian Bieber, for example, one of the scholars. Despite the criticism, it is, however, accepted that the state building paradigm continues to evolve and seems to have been gone through the development of a new pragmatic consensus seeking to increasingly situate itself as part of domestic and local processes, taking therefore a more human face in terms of sustainability and local legitimacy rather than an externally led transformation. In the case of Kosovo, we can see that this paradigm is working, to my opinion. This is one of the reasons, I think, that the author of the book under discussion today evaluates the European Union state building project in the case of Kosovo rather favorably. He maps out the tangible and normative impacts of the international mission and calls it cautiously successful overall. His perspective is supported by evidence and is based on adequate scholarly literature, namely the liberal peace approach and the normative approach combined. His stance complies, therefore, with the first perspective of the liberal peace approach, supporting the liberal goals of a democratic and neoliberal framework for peace in the spirit of the idea of Kant, of the perpetual peace, noting that the adherence towards a pacific union is a prerequisite for this ideal of a democratic state building process to work. I broadly agree with his findings and his arguments, as the role of the EU has proved to be essential for the emergence of the state of Kosovo and its state-building process in international affairs. Even though the international intervention approach from within the neoliberalism paradigm as a state project might have many flaws and have not always proven the most effective, due to many factors also related to the global balance of power among states that are said to determine war and peace, the case of Kosovo and arguably that of other countries in the Balkans region have the prospects of a rather successful story overall. Furthermore, in response to some criticism regarding the international state-building role in Kosovo, I would like to argue that in the case of Kosovo, there has been a previous basis for statehood and working institutional frameworks in place. So it is not quite fair to deem Kosovo or other Western Balkan countries as failed states despite their problems. Historically speaking, Kosovo has always had that social basis for governing legitimacy, so one cannot call it a failed state from within, as staffing critics often relate the so-called statehood failures to some intrinsic characteristics of those states, apart from international inadequate intervention. I would argue that this is not the case with Kosovo, which has covered by itself a wide range of institutional capacity building measures, encompassing everything from the legal and political system to education, health, and welfare. I would like also to mention that a strong element of national identity paired with a liberal spirit of its people and a Western affiliation in terms of cultural, social, but also democratic values and sentiments might have helped the process of international state building in the country. One should mention, for example, the fact that with Kosovo, we have a country in the region of the Western Balkans that has already set a tradition of free and fair elections where the results are not contested, as elsewhere in the region. This is complemented, of course, with a set of other achievements in terms of democratic values applying both internally in governmental terms and in the context of their foreign policies and international relations. In conclusion, I would like to emphasize that despite the fact that the role of the EU as a state builder in the case of Kosovo has been subject to weaknesses of its fragmentation from within the alliance, its role has, however, been crucial for the emergence of the state of Kosovo and later in terms of institutional building, but also in terms of immediate economic reconstruction and free market economy, as well as ethnic accommodation and overall results. Following here the findings of the author of the book that we are discussing today. I would only have a suggestion related to the use of interviews collected during the author's field work that reportedly informed the book content in terms of methodology of the study. The fact that they remain anonymous might be considered a limitation where transcripts of those interviews would have helped to openly grasp the views of those interviewed for the book. So I would like to open the conversation with this first remark and eventually invite the audience to join the discussion in the question and answers session. So I'm just going to leave it here for now. Thank you for your attention and congratulations, Labinot, for your book.
Thank you, Belina. Thank you very much. I don't know if to begin, if you'd like to say anything in response, if there's anything.
Yeah, I mean, thank you, Belina, for your comments. Basically, related to the interviews, it was determination of those who were interviewed to remain anonymous. So it was not up to me to decide if they would like to show up their names, and I simply respected their wish and determination.
Okay, very good. Well, an opportunity now for the audience, starting with David. And I just wanted to ask, from a technical standpoint, if there are questions, can we encourage any of the online participants to put them into the chat?
There's already two in the chat.
They're already excellent. So you'll monitor those for us?
If you want me to read them out, or yeah.
Okay, we'll start first with David.
Well, thank you very much, both of you, very much for what you said. Very interesting. Labinot, a question for you. I mean, towards the end of your talk, I think you were hinting at some kind of reconstruction of something approaching the quint. I may be wrong in that, but that was my supposition. If my supposition is correct, I think it's a very good idea, because it seems to me that the EU has been stuck for ages now, 22 against 5. Something like the quint might help the EU move forward. I think the Americans should be involved. And actually, I like your idea that you try and keep the UK somewhere there, not least because it gets the UK out of the present rut we're in and playing a positive role in an area of the world we actually know quite a lot about. So that's all positive, and I think the idea of using the quint for a wider role in the West Balkans is also a really good idea. To quote Lord Robertson from yesterday, that's the message of hope. But how do we get there? And so who do you think should run with the idea of reconstituting the quint so that it could actually play a really positive role in the area?
Thanks for the comments and the question. Basically, the quint continues to play its role in a way. However, the process has a different type of background. In 2010, after the International Court of Justice delivered its advisory opinion on Kosovo's independence, which stated that Kosovo's independence is in line or is not against international law, the General Assembly of United Nations authorized European Union to facilitate a dialogue between Kosovo and Serbia. So the background of the current EU facilitated process goes back to the United Nations. And basically, the head of external relations or head of foreign policy within the European Union, who leads this process, needs at the same time, at the end of the process, or it is supposed to deliver back to the General Assembly of the UN. So then the General Assembly of the UN would approve any eventual final deal between Kosovo and Serbia, and this would also change the current UN resolution, which is still in place, 1244, with which resolution ended the war between NATO and former Yugoslavia, and then UNMIK mission was established in Kosovo. So this is the formal side of the process. Now the practical or pragmatic side of the process, it has to do with the facts and arguments which are tangible in a way, because US has a special envoy for Kosovo and the entire Western Balkans. United Kingdom has a special envoy recently for Kosovo and the Western Balkans. Same thing is with Germany. Now Germany has a special envoy for relations between Kosovo and Serbia and the entire Western Balkans. So those special envoys are visiting both Kosovo and Serbia in the last few months several times. And what we see here, we also notice, or we can underline a type of important role of both Germany and France. It seems that there is a type of coordinated approach between Germany and France to push forward this process, so the dialogue process, because it seems that the power that the EU institutions do have both sides, Kosovo and Serbia, is not sufficient to move the process forward. So we do see some signs that quint as an entity may be revived per se in a way, because if all those particular member states of the Quint are becoming more active and more active in the recent months, then this may lead us towards that direction. But still, the EU cannot be neglected, cannot be undermined due to the formal side of the process, which I explained previously. So that's my answer. I don't know if that's sufficient or...
It seems to be a very good answer.
Okay. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much for your. Perhaps I could just return to this question in America. Quint came out full force in March when the Kosovo government refused to allow the elections to take, Serbian elections to take place in Kosovo, which is a classic example. That's how Quint might be raising this voice again. I also think we underestimate, it's always this pressure involved in America. America is there the whole time. Under Biden, it's become much more present. And as you know, Linacre and Palmer and his successor, they've made several joint visits, which were quite unprecedented for a long time. And you've got the Washington Agreement. You've got the Washington Agreement. And we may think of it, let's not underestimate what it meant at the time. And that's why Kosovo has relations with Israel. But I want to go back to your remarks about the EU created constructive ambiguity. I would agree that I don't think the EU has always used its position to play its role effectively. But you're talking about the IBM and you're talking about the community and the association, which were part of the first agreement under Caplan. She was highly representative.
Yeah.
I think we have to be very careful when we say what the EU has done, because we do not know. I'm a historian. We do not know what went on at those meetings. And the EU always argues that it only facilitates what those two sides wanted. No minutes were taken. So we cannot go back and look and see. And it's a rather probably unusual situation in international relations, as you know, it's done to build up trust between the two sides, between the Serbs and the Kosovars. So I think we have to be careful, especially in that first period. And Mogherini, I'm not sure how they did it all. I think you can come with a temperature and attitude. I think we have to be careful with these words like create.
No, to some extent, I share your views, your points. I'm aware of the fact that it's up to both parties to provide the inputs and reach an agreement on various issues. And I'm also aware of the fact that no minutes were kept during those meetings. But what do I say and elaborate in my book is the fact that those agreements which were reached under the EU facilitation process and which were generated with EU's institutional logos as well, in practical terms, generated some problems and challenges. I mean, I can reiterate here the association issue. Even nowadays, we don't know if that entity would ever be established in Kosovo, and if that entity would be established in Kosovo, if it would be like a non-governmental organization, or if it will be a type of political entity which would establish in Kosovo the third level of governance. In other words, a type of regional governance, which would definitely be a type of nucleus like the Republika Srpska within Bosnia and Herzegovina, which would make Kosovo state as dysfunctional and not capable to function properly in its entire territory, and would simply create the new Republika Srpska within Kosovo, for which even the international community would not be ready, I guess, because they should have learned the lessons of the Dayton Peace Accords and what was produced in Bosnia. And because even in the case of Bosnia and Herzegovina, as you know, there were several attempts to produce constitutional changes by the various international actors in the last 15 years, but the results are lacking. So, in this sense, but I mean, you have a point on what you say regarding the input of both parties, and I do agree that agreements are part of the input of both sides, Kosovo and Serbia. Otherwise, we wouldn't have two denominators for the same thing, association and community, or border and boundary. That was the only way how they could reach, some type of agreements. But the problem with the agreements comes when those agreements cannot be implemented into practice. Of course, some technical agreements were already implemented, and that's useful, nice, and important. But is that enough? That's the question. Is that enough to move forward? To change the life of ordinary citizens in both countries. And that was also the goal of the UN General Assembly resolution. So the EU should facilitate this dialogue in order to engender a more prosperous life for ordinary citizens of both countries. And what we see, in practice, we do not see substantial progress in that respect. Of course, we do have, negative peaks in a way between Kosovo and Serbia, and more relaxed relations, but still, if we intend for a more progress, which will open the doors for tangible and concrete European integration process, in particular for Kosovo, because Serbia is moving on in that direction in a way, and also for Euro-Atlantic integration for Kosovo. We would need to have a final deal, legally binding agreement, which would solve each and every issue between Kosovo and Serbia.
I see we have, I can't tell if it's 5 or I don't know if the people are using the chat and the Q&A, but we'll take maybe some questions online. If I can read this, is it correct to describe Kosovo as an EU-NATO protectorate? To what extent is the legal and constitutional input into its governance a product of Kosovo political culture and practice? And why don't you take that question first? Yeah, and actually they're two from the same person. Yes, why don't we start with that, and we'll come back to the Quint with the second one. So I guess it's a question of the extent to which EU, NATO have been responsible for.
Because I do not describe in my book Kosovo as an EU or NATO protectorate. So let me first explain this. And to what extent is the legal and constitutional input in its governance a product of Kosovan political culture and practice? Yeah, I mean, of course, as in each and every country around the world, the political culture, level of development of political culture, it's also part of its institutional structures and setup. So even in the case of Kosovo, this is not an exception. So, I mean, definitely the level of development of political culture in Kosovo is also part of Kosovo's institutional structures and setup. However, the way of framing of institutional framework and institutional structures in Kosovo was mainly led by the international actors. Of course, the Kosovo political parties and civil society organizations had their say during that process, but there were cases when there was no agreement, and at the end of the day, special representative of the Secretary General of the UN in pre-independence period would say enough is enough, and he would determine the way forward without asking what local actors would say for a certain issue. I can illustrate with an example. It was constitutional framework in 2001, which was basically thought to be Kosovo's constitution, and some of the main political parties in Kosovo would not agree with the draft of that constitutional framework, and they preferred to be called Kosovo's constitution and not constitutional framework. And at the end of the day, the special representative of Secretary General, who at that time was Danish Foreign Minister Hans Hacker, he said that this is enough. We will move forward without asking you if you like it or not, and we will dub it as constitutional framework. And he just continued with that. He promoted the first parliamentary election in Kosovo, and the rest of the political parties and other structures and organizations in Kosovo just had to follow the order of the king. So yeah, I mean, that's my answer related to the first departure from the
Yeah,
EU.
we come back to the second question now. Come back to this discussion we had earlier about the Quint, and Britain has Britain's departure from the EU reduced its influence in the Quint, or one might even say in the Western Balkans generally, given the importance of the role of the EU there. But William is asking specifically about the Quint and with the Kosovan government. So is Britain in a less influential position now, having left the EU as far as diplomacy in the region is concerned?
Regarding Quint, I don't think so, because whenever Quint, has any meeting between ambassadors of the members of the Quint in Kosovo, UK is present there. So I do not see any lack of influence in that respect within Quint. On the other hand, regarding the influence of UK in Kosovo and the Western Balkans by not being part of the EU, it may be something the opposite, because by not being part of the EU, UK may use its independent status and role to move its policies towards Kosovo and Western Balkans independently from the EU. But I'm quite sure to some extent that UK is coordinating its policies together with the European Union regarding not only Kosovo but entire Western Balkans. But I think that by Brexit, the role of the UK can be more visible in a way in Kosovo and Western Balkans rather than being part of the EU. So,
if I can follow on that, is there any sense that Britain is so preoccupied now with negotiations with the EU, which has really put it at odds because of the Northern Ireland Protocol? Does that, if not diminish maybe its influence, but diminish the importance of the region for maybe both the EU and but especially for Britain? I mean, it has limited energy, limited capacity to direct itself towards issues. Of course, there's even obviously Ukraine now, which is absorbing an enormous amount of its attention. But does the fact that it's in a way at odds with the EU, even if they have common purposes, common objectives, does that diminish the capacity to influence developments in the region?
yeah, capacity, if we link it to the current war between Russia and Ukraine, then if we see it from that perspective, you may have right on that direction. However, I can provide the fact argument here that, for instance, previously to the Brexit, when Britain was part of the European Union, you did not have a special envoy for the Western Balkans. Now that Brexit has happened, you do have a special envoy for the Western Balkans, and he also had a tour around the Western Balkans countries, and he had very important and relevant meetings with stakeholders in the region. So I'm afraid I cannot say that the role of Britain was undermined in the region of the Western Balkans by having the Brexit into place.
Robin, thank you, Robin McConaughey. Worked and traveled a lot in the region post 1990. It was always my hope then that, which I think has not been realised, that we would use not only soft power, but also take an interest in these emerging economies, developing economies, and basically engage in trade relations. I'd always seen that as one way in which we could take an active and hopefully helpful interest in the region. I don't see that happening at the moment. Whether it's post-Brexit exhaustion or a general, as I detected from David's comment, general withdrawal from engagement with Europe, i.e. non-EU Europe. I have to say, I would like to be optimistic that this would develop, but I don't see it at the moment. So I fear that Britain may be willing to intermediate in theory, but bluntly is not prepared to do the detailed hard spade work. Maybe that you are more optimistic, perhaps. But I don't see it at the moment.
Could you summarize the question for the online audience? Because they can't hear it very well. For either of you, if you could summarize the question.
The question
that Robin has just asked about there having been, in Robin's estimate, prospect, greater opportunity that hasn't been seized for enhancement of trade relations between Kosovo and Europe more widely, would you say, or
Western
Britain in
Balkans?
particular?
Yeah, I was thinking of the possible role that Britain could play.
Yeah. So Britain and Kosovo, and that just doesn't seem to have been realized.
Yeah, I mean, you said that I may be more optimistic. In fact, I try to be realistic in a way. The thing here with trade relations, for instance, there are other European countries which have developed quite substantial trade relations, not only perhaps with Kosovo, but for instance, Germany and Serbia, they have quite strong and substantial trade relations. When it comes to Britain, I agree with you, that there is not so much exchange of trade partners and relations between Britain and the Western Balkans, but I think one of the issues, that keeps investors skeptical about investing not only in Kosovo but in the entire region is linked with the issue of stability paradigm, because more or less the international community was interested to implement into practice, to carry out this stability paradigm instead of investing and developing Kosovo and the entire region. Once you have legal issues, then lack of political stability in those countries, not only in Kosovo but in other Western Balkan countries, then investors from Great Britain may prefer to invest somewhere else where there is political stability and also there are no unsettled legal issues. So I think this could be one of the reasons or factors that may explain, the lack of interest, if we may put it like that, from the investors from Great Britain to invest in Kosovo and the region. I know that there were some attempts, to invest not only in Kosovo but in the entire region. But if we compare, with Germany, then I think still Britain would remain behind.
And Slovenia, Croatia have done reasonably better, relatively speaking, in this regard. Do we have more questions on the Q&A now?
No.
I see, okay. The chat.
Those aren't questions.
Those aren't questions, okay. Yes, please.
Hi, I'm Susan, and I'm with Caplan analysis. I have one question. In 2016, the EU has published its global strategy, which it proposed the principle of pragmatism as its guiding principle. And it has also led to the concern that the EU has preferred regional stability or democratic construction. And do you think this strategic shift in the EU's global strategy will influence the credibility of its role as a state builder not only in Kosovo but maybe in the Western Balkan region as well? Thank you.
Thank you.
So the EU global strategy and its guiding principle of putting has this also in a way diminished the capacity for the EU to play a more effective role in the region because of the emphasis on regional stability over democracy, building democratization?
Yeah, I mean, that goes back to what I have mentioned, previously, the lowest common denominator. That's one side, that EU cannot find common policies related to the region, and it finds the lowest common denominator, and this ends up in pragmatism. And at the same time, the stability paradigm in the region of the Western Balkans, it has been implemented continuously in the region since 1999, because, of course, it is essential to not have another war in the region. And it is important first to have stability and then to promote democracy and other essential associated elements with democracy. So in this sense, the EU has acted as it has acted, but definitely, of course, if you cannot promote certain common policies in the region, it will diminish or undermine the credibility of the EU. And I mean, regarding the case of Kosovo, for instance, visa liberalization, just to illustrate with an example. Kosovo remains the only country in the Western Balkans for which EU cannot lift its visa regime. So Kosovo government has fulfilled, the criteria for such a thing, and EU is not able and ready to lift the visa regime for Kosovo's citizens since 2016 or 17, when the European Commission first confirmed that Kosovo's government and institutions have fulfilled all the necessary criteria for such a thing to happen in place. So, of course, now Kosovo citizens will not see with the same eyes the EU as we have seen, for instance, in 2016 and 17, because the EU was not a credible actor. It was not ready to deliver on its promises.
You need to book in. I'm afraid we've run out of time. So I want to thank everybody for coming. Melina for serving as discussant, and especially to Labinot for sharing the fruits of many years, I understand, of research with us, and for having the courage to expose yourself a very large set of issues that you address in the book, and I commend you for taking on such an ambitious project. But it's been a pleasure to have you discuss your book with us today. So thank you very much.
Maybe last words. Thank you again for inviting me, and the pleasure was mine to have such a fruitful discussion and debate with all of you. Thank you once again.
Thank you.